Okay, because today's CHOF-CHES 7, a little bit of an arichas, so we'll begin our story today as it were. I'm holding in my hand, friends. Actually, Deborah gave it out in this plastic cover. Is what I merited to receive. CHOF-CHES 7 on this day, Tavshin Nun Aleph, Yovel Shonim, the Jubilee year of the Rebbe and the Rebbe's arrival to these shores. Now, you know, I'm sure you all listened to Simon Jacobson's interview, who was part of this whole initiative that they should publish a booklet, hoping that the Rebbe would accept it. Turns out not only did he accept it, but he handed it out personally, which was most unusual. He very rarely, he gave out something of his own. It was 3 or 4 times out in Tainis years. He gave out Tanyas and others for him, but not his own works. This was one of them, and they did tremendous research in the introduction, the whole history of CHOF-CHES 7. A whole team of people were assigned to the task to interview and research, and they published Memorim. Memorim had been published already the years previously, 2 years previously, in Onam CHOF-CHES 7, the Rebbe edited. This was published as well as Sichos, all collated in this beautiful contrast, which if you should learn today. It's all available online, at least some of it. I want to share with you something of this contest. It's an amazing thing. We're not so shocked, but it's amazing that every date associated with the Rebbe, after a little bit of probing, becomes this incredible date in Jewish history. It's not obvious to perhaps to the layman or even the scholar, but after a bit, especially not CHOF-CHES 7, as I'll tell you, but after a bit of digging, it's everything. Yud Aleph Nisan, just very briefly, Yud Aleph Nisan. Historically, what's Yud Aleph Nisan? Aside from Yud Aleph, Kesed, and Nisan is the month of Geula, and our generation is the end of Yud Aleph. And aside from, the Rebbe's Nasiya starts on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of the 11th year of the decade. It was in the 11th hour, 10 o'clock at night of the 11th day. It was Yud Aleph Shvat, Shvat's 11th month, Tavshin Yud Aleph. It's all Kesed, and that's our generation. The Rebbe's whole shlichus to bring Kesed, Pnimis HaKesed Atik, the Menucha Be'etzem, the Mata. Aside from that, just historically, Yud Aleph Nisan is the day, the first day after the Yidden crossed the Yarden, the Jordan into Eretz Yisrael. The Torah says, it says in Tanakh, Yeshua, they crossed on the 10th of Nisan. So the 10th of Nisan belongs to the both Golus and Geula. Frierdiker Rebbe was that bridge, and our generation is Geula. He was Yosef Yitzchak Yud, 10, the emphasis. The Rebbe is Yud Aleph, and historically, that was the first day Yidden were in Eretz Yisrael. Hey Tevis, the day that the victory of the Svarim. What's Hey Tevis? Every year on Shavuos, we announce Hey Tevis. The Haftarah of Shavuos is the whole Nevuah of Yecheskel. Yecheskel, the heavens opened up, and he records, and all Kabbalah and Chassidus is based on that, those psukim. More than Yeshaya, he has much more detail. And he gives the date. It was the 5th day, the 4th month, Hey Tevis. Standing on the Har Kvar. Mind-boggling. Hey Tevis. The whole court case began Yutes Kislev. They ended Hey Tevis. So what's CHOF-CHES 7? So let me tell you. He brings it in the Ha'orah, one of the Sichos. And it is as follows. Let me read the Gemara to you. This story appears in 2 places. It appears in Masechta Sanhedrin, which I have at hand. But the original source is in Megillus Tainis, which is a sefer, part of the Gemara that collects all significant dates of the Jewish calendar. And there it says, an event that happened on the 25th of Sivan. You're thinking today is the 28th. CHOF-CHES, Koyach. So listen, this is the story that happened on the 25th of Sivan. Read you the story. The Gemara relates several stories of this enigmatic figure called Gevir ben Psissa. He was a hunchback, whatever the whole Bira, Chassidus, and Kabbalah. So he defended, listen, the Jewish claim to Eretz Yisrael against the descendants of Canaan. This is the story. What's the story? And then he defended later against the Egyptian claim They came before Alexandria. Let me read the story as the Gemara says it. It says in the Braise, on the 24th, so here it says Nisan, but in the Megillah Tainus it says SIVAN, and that is the primary source. So I don't have that, but that's the primary source. This is an error, in fact. It should be SIVAN. What happened? The challenges were removed from Judea, I'll translate, and from Jerusalem. 17 footnote, foreign governors. What happened? For when the Africans came to contend with the Jews before Alexandria, the Macedonian, or Macedonian, how do you pronounce it? Macedonian. Now, of course, Alexandria had conquered Israel. Now, who are these Africans? The Gemara, the Lashon of the Gemara is Afrikoy. So they were the Girgoshim. Yeshua entered the land of Israel. They gave three choices: leave, surrender to our dominion, or fight. So one of them picked up and left. The Girgoshim. The rest fought, and they were defeated. So Hashem gave them, as a reward, a comparable land where, in Africa. This is the Gemara in Yerushalmi. And yeah, it's an interesting footnote here. The Greek historian, Procopius, talks about a city called Girgosh in North Africa. Is that amazing? Amazing. The Girgoshim. Good. But now they woke up. They said, wait a second. And they said, Eretz Canaan Shalonuhi. The African says, the land belongs rightfully to us. And here's the proof. Hashem tells Avram, I'm giving you the land of Eretz Eretz Canaan, the land of Canaan according to its borders, the Gvulei Seho. And Canaan is the ancestor of us, the very people standing before you. We, the Africans, they argued to Alexander the Great. They're descendants of Canaan. So then, Gvia ben Psisa said to the Chachamim, who had to respond to the African's claim, he said, let me argue. And I will go and debate them before Alexander the Great. If they defeat me in the debate, then you can say to them, it's nothing, an ordinary one among us that you have defeated, your victory proves nothing. But if I defeat them, then you can say to them, to the Africans, Alexander, the Torah of Moishe has defeated you. So it seems that Chacham didn't have an answer. It's not clear on why they couldn't have answered, but that's what happened. They said, you know what, go. They gave him permission. So he went and debated the Africans. And this is what he said. So where do you bring your proof that to your claim that the land of Canaan belongs to you? They said, from the Torah. He said, good. I too will bring you a proof only from the Torah. Shenevar, Orur Canaan, Eved Avodim Yelecha. Hashem said to Noach, cursed is Canaan, a slave of slaves shall he be to his brothers. And he continues, now tell me, if a slave acquires property, to whom belongs the slave and to whom belongs the property? To the master. So he's saying that since your ancestor Canaan was a slave to Shem and Yafes, the land belongs to us, the descendants of Shem. And not only that, he continued, but see how many years you have not served us. So in addition to your land, we lay claim to compensation for the centuries of servitude you owe us. Interesting that the Jews are not saying, be our servants. Yeah, he gives them to hate. Jews weren't looking to enslave the Africans, which everybody else did. But you're making this claim, you'll pay. You'll pay for the value of your service. So they're in silence. Alexander the king, sometimes he was called the king, there he's called, the names change. Alexandrus Malka says to them, tell them an answer, respond to him. He said, give us 3 days. He gave them 3 days. They searched, they couldn't find an answer. After 3 days, and what date is that? Today, 28th of Sivan. They realized their untenable position. They fled immediately, abandoning their fields sown as they were and their vineyards planted as they were. And that year was a year of Shvi'is, where you can't cultivate the land. The land was scarce. So therefore, this was a windfall that provided the time of Shvi'is. Then another time he defended the Yid. So the Rebbe brings this. I don't know if he said it in the Sikh or the Rebbe added it later. And the Rebbe says like this. It's a mighty thing. This is symbolic of the Rebbe's coming to America. And how powerful is this today, the whole struggle with that for Eretz Yisrael. Let me read it to you in the Rebbe's words in just direct translation in this ha'orah from the Sikha of 19 Memvov. It's noteworthy because the Fabrenga was Shabbos Pasha CHOF-CHES SIVAN, that Megillas Tainus in the 25th of Sivan, so the Ishmaelim and the Canaanim and the Mitzrayim, it was all three, it wasn't just them. Sorry, I just mentioned the first, I could read all three stories. But they all protested on the 25th of Sivan. It all happened on the same day. The answers are brilliant, each one of them. How in the end they owe you us. The Egyptians said, you owe us for all the years of slavery. Make a cheshbon of how many Jews and how many centuries they served. He said all the money, he said you could deplete the entire Egypt, all its resources, you still owe us. If I recall the Gemara later. So all these arguments, Yishmaelim, Canaanim, and Mitzrayim, all were presented on the 25th of Sivan, on the ownership of Yisrael, Yehuda, and Yerushalayim. And Gviyah ben Sisa answered them at Shuva Nitzches in eternal response. And they said, give us 3 days. And when they couldn't, so they found, as I just mentioned to you, everything in. They made that day a Yom Tov. And the Chachamim, after recording all three challenges, made that day a Yom Tov. So it comes out, what day was that? The 28th of Sivan. So this can be connected to the 28th of Sivan in our generation. And then they began a whole new Tnufa. Tnufa means really a move, a wave in the Avodah of conquering the land. What's conquering the land? First of all, conquering North America, the lower hemisphere. From the Torah perspective, we're the lower hemisphere. Israel is the upper hemisphere. And how do we conquer it? When a Jew stands firmly with Torah, like in the story with Gviyah ben Sisa, through which firmly and proudly, through which he affects even the refinement of the nations of the world. Even those that oppose flee and leave their homes full of good. It's the elevation of Tzutz Kedusha, which are in the possessions of the nations of the world. Like the Eden left Mitzrayim, they emptied it. And moreover, this elevates not just the sparks, but the nations themselves. Because they didn't say they disappeared. They ran and fled. They didn't lay in this battle. But they went to their true place, recognizing their place in the world and the Jews' place in Eretz Yisrael. Just take it further, again, especially today. They used to about Kiddush conquering the world. But especially now, Mamash is the whole Israel is a flashpoint to the world and our right to it. What's the message? Proud Jew, sourced in Torah, and all of the arguments and all the protests melt. On the contrary, the protesters become a means of prosperity for the Jew and for them. They go to their place and will help them develop their place. And Israel becomes what it could be, the means by which to bring prosperity, begashmis, baruchnis to the whole world. And all this is when CHOF-CHES. Okay, Sid, before you go, stay on for a second.